Okay, so here's our last question, which came from the floor. How do you folks balance environmental cleanup of the Emerson plant, excuse me, with redevelopment of the Emerson plant? So, do all of you want to respond? Okay, and we're starting.
I have to leave in about 8 minutes. I'm committed to help with the pharmaceutical collection.
All right. Well then, Chris, do you mind if we begin?
Of course not.
Wait, do you want to begin?
What was the question?
The question is,
how do you balance
environmental cleanup with the development of the Emerson plant? And thank you for the question.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's a large site, and there are different grades of cleanup that need to happen there. Again, with the reclassification of TCE, I think there might be a much bigger lever to push this with. And also, if that's combined with a fresh determination from the city to push it, we may get some faster cleanup. I'm really hoping for that. But if things sort of float as they are, there's certain things that we could do there at the various levels. I'm all for starting a power plant there. There are people who are looking at it and interested in doing it. Then there's a different grade of cleanup that has to happen for the possibility of any residential building there. And of course, the residential building itself can be done in various ways, depending on what is mapped out and sited there. So, and it's quite a large parcel. I know it's not all in the city, but this could be a very interesting development in both the town and city's interest. It could be an interesting cooperation that really ought to happen. I hope that answers your question. As far as I'm concerned, there's no reason to wait on one or the other, but that cleanup has to happen. I mean, now it's even more imperative. So, one last thing. Along with being reclassified as a known carcinogen, it's also established without a doubt now that it causes birth defects. And that's really a threat to a neighborhood in the most primal sense.
Emerson's a really complicated site. There's a lot of players involved, as many of you know. We have to, so we can talk about what we want to do to redevelop it, but ultimately we need Emerson at the table to either agree to take part, agree to sell, one or the other. We also need the DEC at the table to agree to enforce the cleanup, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to have to force Emerson to cough up the dollar to pay for the cleanup. Now, as Wade mentioned, there's different degrees of what that cleanup can be. Residential grade cleanup is a long way from industrial grade cleanup. So determining what the highest and best use for that site is tremendous. It actually has to be balanced. There's no other way that anything will happen with Emerson unless we balance the redevelopment with the cleanup. Because if we establish that we want it to be a housing project, but the cleanup requirement is established to residential or to industrial grade, then it will never be safe to be a housing project. So the important thing is that we do balance this, that we do bring everyone to the table in consideration for it. As for ideas of what to do with the facility, in all honesty, the most likely scenario is going to be something of an industrial grade. It requires the least amount to get us to. It's not going to make us happy because we obviously want the hill completely cleaned up. But looking at it realistically, I think that's a likely scenario. If that is to happen, a power facility is a great idea. I've been working with a local group, as John knows, that it has been looking to work towards putting a power plant in there, specifically in the way of combined heat and power. And why combined heat and power? Well, for one thing, there's tens of millions of dollars in grant money coming to the state specifically for that purpose. Well, what a great thing. Free money coming in and to the account of tens of millions of dollars goes a long way into helping us actually get something done, actually get shovel-ready and get ground broken over there at Emerson so that we can make a difference. Other benefits of a combined heat and power facility is that the byproduct is steam. Steam can actually be used to power canning facilities, which is another option that we've looked at for there. So you can have part of the facility generating new power. Apologize.
Put it on our website. Cynthia, please.
It's not an oppositional view in terms of a balance. They have to happen together. It is integral that the city be a partner at the table in this process to make sure that we can achieve the level of cleanup that will fulfill the long-term goals of our community. Emerson is on the hook. There is no denying that. The DEC is responsible for requiring the highest grade of cleanup or an acceptable grade of cleanup, and Emerson will pay for it. There's no way out of that. If we can make sure that we are at the table to push this process forward, it has been 20 years, we need to be there to keep it moving in the direction that we would like to see it moving. I wish I could say that in my experience, the difference between residential grade cleanup and industrial grade cleanup, especially if you're looking at density housing, it's actually in reality not that much different. And that's the sad truth of what is acceptable to our government in terms of residential, the level of acceptable amounts of contamination in residential properties, unfortunately. But we have to move forward. As I've said earlier, South Hill needs to get on the other side of this process for our community to move forward. We need to make sure that we are at the table. We need to keep the focus on keeping our city at the table with the players and making sure that we are not a bystander in this process.
Can you repeat the question, please?
It has to do with balancing the
cleanup
with the redevelopment at the Emerson plant. How you would balance that?
Basically, I think I understand the question. I'm personally involved in the day-to-day operation of South Hill Business Campus, which used to be NCR. And I mean, only from a code enforcement standpoint. So I see a place that was once a shell, because when I started working up there, I went into the plant and I just couldn't believe what it looked like then and what it looks like today. And I think that it's a classic example of an incubator system that actually works. I think that that's exactly what can happen. I want to make sure that go back to the fact that it's not just Emerson, because Emerson really doesn't exist anymore. It's BorgWarner, which is a really big company that actually admitted to dumping into this. So we've got to make sure that we focus on the right players in this. We've got to make sure that they clean up, that they put the investment into cleaning up this facility. But at the bottom line is that when it's cleaned up, we've got to be able to make sure that it's purchased by a private consortium or by some consortium that's willing to create an incubator system, just like South Hill Business Campus, because it's amazing. I'd suggest some of you go there once in a while just to see exactly what's going on. You've got companies that are building microprocessors. You've got companies that are building batteries. You've got storage facilities. You've got companies that are doing chemical research, all coming from the colleges and universities around us. We've got this enormous resource that's not being used. So we've got to make sure that we can allow the colleges and universities as think tanks to help us develop these facilities, and we've got to make sure that they're cleaned up by the proper people. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much.
I'll be brief. It can't. That's the balance. That is the balance. You can't have development without cleanup. We've got to clean it up. And what's important to remember here is this is going to be complicated because it's half in the city and it's half in the town. Right? Emerson is going to pay for it in part. Whoever the private developer is going to pay for it in part. And the city and the town are going to have to work together on the revenue sharing process once whatever is built is built. So there are going to be a lot of parties here. And I think we can take a cautionary tale from what happened in Gun Hill. We have to make sure that we have all of the funds secured before we begin remediation and cleaning up. Because you guys know what happened in Gun Hill, where we started to clean up and knock down the factory. We ran out of money. And the site is still sitting there empty. We can't, I believe it's the state and the private developer can't come to terms on who will pay for the rest of the cleanup. We need to make sure that we've got that in place before we begin. But again, otherwise, without a cleanup, there will be no development. So clean up first, then rebuild.
I think we're all in agreement about the cleanup of South Hill, but I'll just say that we need to move away from remediation. We need to move away from mitigation and just stand firm on remediation. If it's not cleaned up, it doesn't matter how many fans that we have going in our basements. We need to get the stuff out of the ground. And yeah, we're in a church, so I'll say stuff out of the ground and keep moving through that. I think at the same time that we're focusing on getting this cleaned up, that we need to actually pull the people in the room together, the city, the town, the colleges, the business community, the economic development arms of the state, whether it's that we have locally, TCAD, hopefully if we can bring Empire Development Zone back together. We still have that here. We have a lot of different agencies here that will be able, I think, would be happy to have a stake in here. And it's going to be a public-private partnership that actually gets this thing off the ground. This is where you're going to come in as well, because whoever does that, particularly if it's a private developer, is going to be looking to the city for money. They're going to look to the county for money. This is your dollars. So that means if you don't like it, you need to have a say in there. But at the same time, if there's some great ideas you have, you need to have a say in there. And that's something I'm very firm about. I like that inclusive aspect of it. Pam, I know, talked on the trail about having this power plant, this power heat. She talked about the heating district. And I've never spoken to them because I always thought it was an intriguing idea and I wanted to hear more of it. But I think if you have something like that, if we can do that, you're talking about a self-empowerment thing where we actually have control. We are in a position to actually feed back to the grid and bring down our own city expenses. When we're talking about something as big as Emerson, we have the opportunity where you're talking about job creation, you're talking about job generation, you're talking about training programs, you're talking about economic development, incubator, as Steve said. One of the things that reminds me of is the Ford building. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Ford building in Detroit, but this is a building, it's a beautiful thing in the middle of downtown Detroit. Whatever was there before, it used to house homeless people. It was kind of like the former Taj Mahal here in the city. And the project that came forward, as I understand it, was they got all of the people that live there, the homeless people. They taught them the skills and taught them how to help them build this beautiful new building that they had at the time. We just have to make sure we take the next step, because right now they kicked those folks out and made them go live right there. I think we have the opportunity to set up housing, to set up mixed-use development. We can do a lot of things there, but we have to be firm on what our expectations are and making sure that we're all ready to move together collaboratively.
All right.